Hello, everybody, and welcome to Self-Assessment Revolution. So, this is all about pushing our future teachers to think critically about assessment and reflection. And so, what does this self-assessment mean? It means that I don't give my students grades, they grade themselves. They tell me what to put in the grade book, um, which forces them to think really carefully about whether or not their work meets the expectations. A lot of time, unfortunately, in school culture, kids can do work if they kind of basically understand the assignment, turn it in with just kind of a hope and a prayer that they did that right. But if they're in charge not only of doing the work, but of assessing the work, then it makes all of those processes and all of that thought much more conscious and brings it to the forefront. So, first, why self assessment? Um, I want to focus on three different areas in which self assessment, kids giving themselves grades, provides them huge benefits. So, first is just in the learning benefits. If we're just thinking of our TAP students as students, then if you consider the visible learning and John Hattie's effect sizes, what really helps kids accelerate their learning, then there are huge effect sizes for evaluation and reflection. So that's making judgments and reflecting on your work has a 0.75, which, just in case you're not sure what that means, it means that it can considerably accelerate student learning, like beyond what they learn in an average year. And then the same effect size for self-judgment against standards. So looking at specific standards, at a rubric, at sample work, and then judging yourself based on that really engages all of those critical thinking processes and pushes students to learn more and to learn more quickly, like at an accelerated rate. And as you're looking at the year as a whole. And then we also have to consider that we're not just teaching students, of course, we are teaching future teachers. So this is a chance for them to practice some teacher best practice. I was interested to learn that if you go to the Educators Rising Standards or the Utah Effective Teaching Standards, they have some very interesting similarities. So these are the Educators Rising Standards. And notice that in their standards, they have one entire standard based on assessment, so understanding assessment and using data, and one entire standard about reflection. And then if you go to the Utah's teaching effective teaching standards, then you're going to find in instructional practice one whole standard based on assessment, and in professional responsibility, one whole standard based on reflection and continuous growth. And I just want you to think in your own experience and with the teachers that you work with in your building and yourself as you were a new teacher, how well did you really understand assessment? How well do teachers really understand the value and the importance of ongoing assessment, formative assessment, summative assessment, and also how well did you understand reflection? We want our future teachers to get in deep with both of these concepts. So we want to force them to ask themselves, what is the point of this assessment that I'm being asked to perform as a student? What is the point of this performance objective, of this mastery standard that I'm meant to learn? Why is this assessment the way it is? What is it actually measuring? And how can I show that I'm meeting the standard based on what the assessment is trying to measure? What does it look like to meet the standard? What does it look like to be proficient or mastery? Um, and then, of course, reflection. So, practicing. I mean, I think all of us can get better at reflection, but it's not a natural process to consciously think about the past and then make explicit connections for how the past is impacting the present and how it will impact the future, especially for teenagers. This is a really complex process. It's a higher order process. Most of us continue forward without a lot of reflection. But best practice for teaching is constant and continuous reflection, really conscious and visible connections between what has been done, what's happening now, and what will be done, or what changes will be made. And then the third category that makes self-assessment really important is life skills. So learning how to advocate for themselves, learning professional communication. When I have really small TAP classes, their grades look like an interview with me where they sit down and tell me in an interview what they've earned and how they know that they've earned that grade. So they have communication with an adult on a professional level, and it makes them an equal to me. We are giving and taking and sharing in that conversation. So they get to practice being on a level with a professional adult and what how that impacts their communication. And then obviously self-awareness. That is a hard thing for a student to tell me, I think that I've earned a B for this reason, and then for me to ask them, show me on the rubric where your work matches the checklist or where your work matches the expectations, and for them to realize that it doesn't quite. Like, this forces students to be very honest with themselves and very self-aware, because if the evidence isn't there, it just isn't there. There's not a lot of room for padding. And our students are generally a little bit harder on themselves than we would be. We have a tendency to give benefit of the doubt, but they know whether they deserve that, but they don't have the doubt. So they know in actuality whether they've earned the grade or not, whether they've met the standard or not. So these are the reasons. I mean, I think self-assessment is amazing. In order to have self-assessment be the rule of thumb, be the structure of your class, you have to be extraordinarily clear about your expectations. Um, Before I did self-assessment, there are a lot of times when I would realize what I was going for while I was grading. Like, I would get the student assignments back, and as I'm reading them, realize what I actually wanted and whether they matched it or whether they didn't. You can't do that. With self-assessment, you have to be absolutely clear on your expectations. You have to understand them, and then you have to make them clear and visible to the students themselves. So that means you got to have a unit plan, like from day one. On day one of my unit, I tell the students what the performance objective will be, and I give them the rubric or the checklist for the unit. So just to show you what I mean by rubric or checklist, I'm going to show you an example, and this is an example that you'll have in the resources page. But in their, let's see. So in TAP 1, Strand 1, the first performance objective is an interview. So on day 1 of Strand 1, when I'm introducing this unit, I also give them this grading checklist. And at the end of the unit, when we're discussing together, we will go over each one of these bullet points and see whether they have matched it or not. And I'll talk a little bit more about this grading checklist in the future. If you're looking at this going, this makes no sense, then I will talk about it in a second. It's also pretty important to have samples of students who have been successful. Now, this was really hard for me this year because the strands and standards have been altered and they're new, right? So I didn't have a lot of student work that matched, but I was able to find some mentor text and examples online because, of course, the work that we're engaging in is work that teachers are engaging in all over the place. And teachers love to blog. We all know this. Teachers love blogging and YouTubing. So I could find some examples to show students. But that's really how they're going to tell what does it look like to match the rubric. And it gives them a reference point. how to compare their own work to work that has and hasn't been successful in the past. Students are going to need time to revise because you're going to be giving them feedback. It is not true that because they're declaring their grades, they get less input from you. Grades really aren't the most valuable input from a teacher anyway. The most valuable input is feedback that is ongoing in the process. We know this. We know the importance of formative assessment, the importance for the teacher of assessing how they're doing during the process, and then the importance for the students that their performance should not be a black box, that they're not aware of how they're doing until the grade shows up. So self-assessment really should just force you, the teacher, and motivate you, the teacher, to be constantly giving feedback and constantly providing opportunities for revision, for them to change or adjust their process throughout the unit.